Date, July 3rd, 1994. Place, Fairfield Township, Baraboo, Wisconsin. Time, 10 p.m. 14-year-old Christian Steiner is headed off to bed. He needs to get some rest for his shift at McDonald's the following morning. Everything seems normal as the remaining family members turn in for the evening. The following morning, Chris's parents go to his room to wake him. They find his bed empty, and Chris is gone. Confused and concerned, the family frantically search the home. They find that a screen in their other son, Jim's bedroom, had been cut. Jim's room is on the first floor, and Chris's is on the second. Jim had spent the night at a friend's house. The front door was also unlocked. But where was Chris? 6 days later, they would have their answer. On July 10th, 1994, at 8:15 p.m., Chris Steiner's lifeless body was found in the Wisconsin River. He was leaning against a stump and had been there for quite some time. At the time, authorities thought Chris may have snuck out of his house and met up with some friends on the river to party. It was the 4th of July weekend, after all. An autopsy was conducted on the body, but they could not run a toxicology test because the remains were too badly decomposed, so they could not determine if Chris had any alcohol or drugs in his system at the time of his death. The medical examiner listed his cause of death as drowning. Chris was laid to rest at St. Joseph's Catholic Cemetery in Baraboo, Wisconsin. Date, July 29th, 1995. Place, Fairfield, Wisconsin, just outside of Baraboo. The Phillips family returns home after a dinner out. They gather in the living room to watch some television. 13-year-old Thaddeus, along with his 5-year-old sister, eventually fall asleep on the couch. The rest of the family retires to their bedrooms. At about 4 a.m., Thad's mom and dad get up to check on the children. They find Thad's sister sound asleep on the couch, but Thad is gone. Parents begin to search the home in search of Thad. The family was new to the area, having just moved into the home the previous month. When they couldn't locate Thad in the home, they began to search the exterior to no avail. They notified the sheriff's department and filed a missing persons report. Where is Thad? Here is Thad's story. After falling asleep on the couch, Thad felt someone pick him up. He thought it was his dad carrying him to bed, as he often did. As he felt himself be taken outside, he realized he was not with his dad. He was very confused. He thought the stranger might have known his parents. After waking up a bit, the stranger told Thad that he was having a party at his house and started naming off other kids that were going to be there. Thad recognized the names, so he went along with the stranger. Once they arrived at the stranger's home, which was only half a mile from his own, the stranger asked Thad if he liked model trucks. Thad said he did, so the stranger took Thad to his upstairs bedroom to look at them. Once inside, the stranger threw Thad onto the bed and twisted his right ankle until it broke. The stranger then put his head in his hands, and Thad took that opportunity to run. He got down the stairs to the living room and halfway through the kitchen before the stranger caught up with him. He put Thad in a chokehold and drug him to the living room. He pushed Thad against the couch, grabbed Thad's right leg, and bent it upwards until the thigh bone snapped. After disabling his victim, the stranger introduced himself as Joe and began to act as if the two were friends. Thad asked Joe why he was doing this to him, and Joe said he likes the sound of bones breaking. Then Thad asked him why he didn't just do it to himself then. Joe answered, "I tried, but I just couldn't get the angles right." Thad asked Joe if he had done this to other people, and he told him yes, 2 other boys, and he told him the names of at least one. Thad and Joe watched television, and Thad eventually passed out. The next morning, Thad asked Joe if he could call his parents. Joe told him he could and handed Thad a phone. The phone was disconnected, and Joe found Thad's disappointment entertaining. The two then went back to watching television until Joe decided it was time to take Thad back to his bedroom. This time, Joe threw Thad on the bed and twisted his left ankle until his foot was backwards. Thad tried to fight back, but he was no match for the 6 foot tall, 190-pound Joe. Joe would cover Thad's face with a pillow and threatened to break Thad's neck or back if he kept fighting. Thad believed him. Thad said he never cried and just tried to stay alive. As the day wore on, Thad's legs began to swell and change colors. They became extremely painful. Joe would put leg braces on Thad and force him to walk. At one point, Thad had the leg braces on and fell all the way down the stairs, injuring himself even more. That night, Joe left in his car. Thad heard him leave and tried to escape for the second time. With his legs broken, battered, and bruised, Thad pulled himself to the staircase and threw himself down head first. Once he got to the bottom, he passed out. When he woke, he started to drag himself through the home. He passed out several times as he tried to get away. He found himself in the middle of the living room floor when Joe returned home. Needless to say, Joe was surprised and angry. Joe dragged Thad back upstairs to his torture room and began to twist his already broken ankles, and then jumped on his legs until his knee broke. Once he finished unleashing his rage on poor Thad, Joe would get out brand new white athletic socks and layer them on Thad's feet. They had to be perfectly placed in order to complete his ritual. Joe had hundreds of brand new white socks. The placing of the socks seemed to calm Joe's anger. Joe would then pleasure himself in front of his victim. Thad was then brought back downstairs to watch movies with Joe. The pain was unbearable, and Thad eventually passed out. By Sunday morning, Thad's legs were in terrible shape. The pain was indescribable. Joe continued his torture on Thad throughout the day by jumping on his legs, applying the socks, and pleasuring himself. That night, Joe was going out again. Wanting to prevent Thad from trying to escape, Joe locked Thad in his bedroom closet. As soon as Thad heard Joe leave in his car, he began to feel around in the closet for something he could use to get through the door. He found a wooden guitar and began banging on the door until it broke open. He then again dragged himself to the staircase and threw himself down head first. Once he got to the bottom, he passed out. He would wake up and pass out several times as he crawled towards the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, he was able to get to a wall phone that had a long enough cord for him to pull it off the cradle. Thankfully, the buttons were on the handset. Thad dialed 911. At about 8 p.m. on July 30th, 1995, police arrived at the residence of Ronald and Bertha Clark. The Clarks were out of town, but their 17-year-old son, Joe, had not traveled with them. Police found Thad Phillips on the kitchen floor of the filthy home. Thad's left knee was completely backwards. His feet were laying sideways. His lower extremities were bruised and swollen. The young boy was dehydrated too. He hadn't eaten or drinking anything during his captivity. Thad was rushed to St. Clair Hospital in Baraboo. Thad had sustained 2 broken femurs, 1 broken knee, 1 broken tibula, and broken ankles. A third of Thad's blood had drained to his legs. His injuries were life-threatening. Dr. Michael Plooster and Dr. German Musch performed surgery on Thad's legs, which included pins in one leg and a rod in the other. According to Thad's attending physicians, the injuries were so severe he had about 2 hours to live when he arrived at the hospital. As Thad was undergoing treatment, authorities were looking for Joe Clark, the perpetrator of these horrendous acts. I read varying reports, some saying Joe's house was put under surveillance until he returned home, and he was arrested at that point. Others say he was arrested at a party. Either way, it is said that Joe was arrested for the torture and kidnapping of Thaddeus Phillips. His only comment to police? "Oh, he's still alive?" Thad did tell authorities that Joe told him he had tortured other boys. He remembered that one boy's name was Chris, and he thought the last name began with an S. His dad brought out the phone book, and read off all the last names that started with S. When he said Steiner, Thad said, "Yes, that's it." Did Joe murder Chris Steiner? Based on this new information, the Steiner family agreed to have Chris's body exhumed for a second autopsy. They had neglected to x-ray Chris during his first autopsy. The new autopsy revealed that both of Chris's knees and ankles were broken. His injuries were consistent with what had happened to Thad. Not only were Chris and Thad about the same age, they both lived close to Joe Clark. Here is the map showing where their homes were. So this is Google Earth's view of Chris Steiner's home, which would be right here on this corner. And then this main road here that he actually lived on takes you right to the Wisconsin River, which is where he was found. He was actually found further downriver, and nobody ever did determine where the actual dump site was, if it was actually where he was found or if he got caught up on a tree. We're just not sure. But yeah, so that's what it would look like. It's not far-fetched to believe that he did something to him on that road and then took him to the river. So according to the newspaper articles, Chris's body was found near Pine Island State Wildlife Area, which is located right here, and you can see the Wisconsin River runs right here. And there are quite a few sandbars along the river, so he could have been really anywhere along there, but I believe it was probably somewhere along the banks, would be my guess. But yeah, somewhere in there. Thad's home was about a half mile from Joe, and Chris's about 2 miles. The similarities between the two boys are eerie. Thad did have several injuries to repair the damage done by Joe Clark. He eventually returned to school, but on October 8th, 1996, Thad was given yet another blow. He and another teen were in a trailer park about a half a mile from Philip's residence. Another boy named Michael Hubish lived in that trailer park. He was 15 years old. According to Michael, he was being harassed by Phillips and his friend, and he was scared. So he grabbed a .22 caliber rifle, loaded it, and stood by the front door of his trailer. Thad and the other boy knocked at the door, pushing the door slightly open. Michael said he saw Thad and fired a single shot at him. Thad said he heard a loud bang and then realized he'd been shot. The two boys ran to Thad's friend's trailer and called 911. The bullet had entered the back of Philip's left shoulder, exited the left shoulder, entered the left jaw, and exited the upper lip. Some say Michael was Joe Clark's friend, and Michael wanted to prevent Thad from testifying against Joe. Michael's mom, Dawn Dravis, denied any connection between her son and Clark. Hubish received 2 years probation and was ordered to pay restitution to Phillips, a pretty light sentence considering it was attempted murder. Thad did go on to testify against Joe Clark, in spite of everything he had been through. The prosecutor elected to charge Joe with the torture and murder of Chris Steiner, and Thad was a key witness. Joe Clark pleaded no contest by reason of mental illness. He claimed that he was involved in an accident a few years prior and it had affected his brain. In 1993, Clark fell off the back of a dirt bike. He suffered an epidermal hematoma about an inch long. The injury required surgery. Bertha Clark testified that her son saw an imaginary man in their barn and had been wanting to unalive himself. He had also experienced swelling in his head the day before he kidnapped Phillips. Quote, "There's something terribly wrong. He needs psychiatric treatment," unquote. Psychiatric examiners studied Joe and said that Clark was a homosexual sadist with a sock fetish. He is aroused by watching people suffer. He had apparently stolen Thad's socks the night he kidnapped him. The examiner said being a sexual sadist is not a mental disease and did not prevent him from conforming with the law. They also said Clark was a habitual liar who faked all manner of mental illness symptoms. A teacher testified in court about threatening phone calls made by Clark 3 years before his dirt bike accident, and others said he had threatened to kill a teacher and had punched other kids in the face prior to his accident. The jury found Clark sane, and it was determined that he should be tried as an adult. During the trial, Joe's parents testified that Joe was asleep in bed on the night of July 3, 1994, when Steiner was believed to have been abducted and killed. Others testified that Joe's mom, Bertha, regularly passed out from drinking, and Joe's own journal confirmed it. Witnesses said Clark regularly snuck out of his home. Authorities also found an interesting list in Clark's bedroom when they searched it. The list had 3 different categories: quote, can wait, get to now, and leg thing, unquote. The list had a total of 29 names on it. All were teenage youths between the ages of 11 and 15. The names have never been made public, but the families of those on the list were notified. On Friday, November 7, 1997, Joe Clark was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide, mayhem, and physical abuse of a child for the 1994 torture and death of Christian Steiner. He was sentenced to 100 years in prison. In January of 1997, Phillips filed a civil suit against Clark. He was represented by the same attorney that fought for the Jeffrey Dahmer victims. He won $21 million. As of 2023, he has yet to be paid a penny. Thad does have a GoFundMe set up if you would like to donate. One question still remains. Why did Joe Clark do the things he did? What makes a teenage boy do such heinous acts? We don't know much about Joe Clark's beginnings. What we do know is that Bertha and Ronald adopted Joe in Council Bluffs, Iowa, as a newborn baby of a, quote, doper, unquote. So Joe may have been born addicted to illegal drugs. The Clark family, which included a daughter, moved to Wisconsin from Chicago when Joe was 6. Several people testified that Joe caused a lot of trouble at school with both the teachers and fellow students, including punching other kids in the face. Different counseling services had been involved in helping Joe with his behavioral issues. We also know that Joe's parents seemed to be alcoholics, and the family lived in a dirty, ill-kept home. Did all of these factors turn Joe into a monster, or was he born that way? Were there more victims? We may never know. For those of you that are curious about what happened to Michael Hubish, the teen that shot Thad in 1996, well, he was later sentenced to 12 years in prison for sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl in Baraboo. He is now on the National Sexual Offenders List, along with Joe Clark. I'd like to end today's story by remembering one of Joe Clark's victims. Christian A. Steiner was born November 19, 1979, in Baraboo, Wisconsin. He was 14 years old at the time of his death and would have been entering the 9th grade in the fall of 1994. Chris enjoyed fishing, basketball, and baseball. He was a member of St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Baraboo. He left behind his parents, George and Catherine, along with his sister Angela and brothers James and Patrick. We are at St. Joseph's Cemetery in Baraboo, and we are here to pay our respects to Christopher Steiner, who lost his life in 1994. And he was only 14 years old. Here we have it. Christian A. went by Chris, November 19th, 1979. Died July 4th, 1994. And on the backside, gone from our sight, but not our memories. Gone from our touch, but not our hearts. 14 years old.